Well, welcome everyone. We're glad that you're joining us today. My name is Sandy Resmer, and I'm a TA specialist with the PDG B-5 TA Center. Today's webinar is the third in our workforce series, and it's the basics of employer-sponsored childcare. And before we get started, I'm going to go over the housekeeping slide. The audio and the video are being recorded, and that link will be shared with you. At the end of the month, we send out an in case you missed it email that has all the captioned video links, all the note catchers, and all the resource lists that we have shared with you for our webinars for the month. This morning, you should have received your confirmation email, and attached to that email was the note catcher and the resource list. If you didn't get that, we will be dropping those files in the chat, so not to worry. Also, click the CC icon at the bottom of your screen if you are in need of the captions. Technical and content questions may be submitted in the chat. Select your preferred speakers and microphones also at the bottom of your screen. And we would really appreciate it if you would rename yourself and add your state after your name. And so now I will hand it over to my colleague, Joy Milano. Joy?
Thanks, Sandy. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I wanted to lay out briefly what the flow of our time together today will be. We're going to spend this time diving into employer-sponsored childcare initiatives. So we will start with some framing from the federal level. Kimberly Burgess-Sims is joining us from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Administration for Children and Families, and she will share how federal priorities align and support around early child care and education, align and support employer-sponsored child care. Then we'll hand it off to Samantha Einer-Trewergy, who will provide some excellent information that is meant to equip you as state and local early leaders to engage with or build on initiatives in your own state. We will have time for question and answers. So as we go through, please use the chat to contribute any questions you might have as we go along, or share any information about what's going on in your state or resources or links to initiatives in your own state that you might want to share with your colleagues. Raquel Diaz from the ECE Workforce Center is here with us, and she will be monitoring the chat and facilitating question and answers for us. And then we will have a state spotlight from Caitlin Farrick with the Wisconsin Department of Health and Human Services about projects underway in her state. So with that, we can go ahead and advance the slide, and I will hand off to Kim Burgess-Sims.
Thanks so much, Joy. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well today. I am a senior policy advisor in the Office of Early Childhood Development at the Administration for Children and Families, and really glad to be here with you and the PDG team. I work closely with Richard and Judy and others in the PDG team. And I focus mostly on our ACF workforce initiatives. And I'm really glad to have a chance to just talk for a couple minutes about how this topic of employer-sponsored care fits in with our broader early childhood efforts, both to build the supply of high-quality early care and education for kids and families, and also especially around our efforts to retain a strong workforce and recruit more qualified workers into the field, and really focus on equity within all of that work. So if you go to the next slide, I'm just going to talk for a moment about the president's sweeping executive order that focused on care across the life cycle. So this was not just about early care and education, but young children, people with disabilities, and seniors. Hopefully most of you are aware of this executive order, but this is really, it has been an important development because it is a whole of government approach that has more than 50 executive actions called on for implementation across agencies, including HHS, where we are, but also Department of Education, Department of Labor, USDA, VA, SBA, OPM, lots of federal agencies all working together and all called on to take responsibility for early childhood. So I just wanted to kind of note sort of where the employer efforts fall in there, both with agencies, partner agencies that work with employers, and some of the actions that we're taking and we've been called on to take at HHS. You'll see a few of those highlights on this slide. And notice that those are both about making care more accessible for families, more affordable for families, and supporting the early care and education workforce. And I'll just note also that many of the directives that are highlighted in the CARE EO are efforts that HHS already had underway that we are deeply committed to, and some of those actions would reduce costs for families and increase subsidy reimbursement rates. And I wanted to flag, if you have not, I don't know if you guys have met since the Office of Child Care released their notice of proposed rulemaking that includes several proposed changes to the Child Care and Development Fund. Those proposals are currently open for public comment through August 28th. So if you haven't paid attention to that, I do encourage you to look at OCC's website and learn more about the policies that are proposed there. And also, I know that part of why we're focused on this employer-sponsored care today is because there are concerns about COVID relief funds ending, and many of the policies that are proposed in the NPRM, I think we've learned a lot during this COVID period, and we are pushing for many things that states have been already doing in response to the workforce crisis and the COVID experience and with the funds. So just wanted to make sure people are focused on that. I can put a link into the CCDF page where you can see the NPRM. But there are also some highlights in the EO around improving wages for Head Start teachers and improving access to mental health supports and making it easier for tribal facilities changes. So there's a lot of work that we are really committed to. And I just wanted to make sure that I think Sam will touch on what the EO says specifically around employer-sponsored care and how federal agencies can work with employers to support care. And I think it's really important to just kind of think about employers as part of the all hands on deck effort that the president's calling for and that we really need to address the challenges that we face. So I'm going to not spend a lot of time on this next slide, but I wanted to note that while working with employers and partners all across different sectors and across agencies is really critical, it's also really important to think about this in the context of public investment, both federally and at the state and local levels. So I'm sure you all are also thinking a lot about how your state can invest in addition to partnering with employers. And we really do need that full investment across sectors and responsibility to make the progress that we need to for kids and families and for the workforce. And so I just wanted to note that President Biden does have a really strong proposal for $600 billion in new early childhood investment, in addition to really important increases in discretionary funds for Head Start, CCDF, and for the preschool development grant program in the budget this year. And this is the largest federal budget proposal for early care and education ever. So I think it demonstrates a strong commitment beyond just doing what we can right now with existing resources like what's in the CARE EO, really focusing on where we need to go. And I know I already talked for a moment about the American Rescue Plan and other COVID relief funding ending. It's really important to think about how we can leverage what we have now to look forward to a more comprehensive strategy going forward. So just wanted to acknowledge that that President Biden and Vice President Harris have pointed to this proposal for Congress, and I know you all are also working on your state efforts too. So if you go to the next slide, I also just wanted to, we really can't talk about this without thinking about the impact of the ARP over the past few years. Stabilization grants now have reached over 225,000 providers, impacting as many as 10 million children. And states do still have some childcare supplemental funds that can be used for purposes in the CCDBG Act. And so that includes supporting the workforce. And if you go to the next slide, there's just some highlights of some of the important ARPA supplemental investments that are being made, efforts to make more stable payment rates and payment practices that provide reliability for providers and can improve costs for families. There's just a lot of innovation happening right now in where you guys are. And I've been really excited to see some of the ways that you guys are creatively using the preschool development grant funds to sustain and build on some of the ARPA efforts. I know that Sam is going to talk about and spark some ideas about ways that you can think creatively about partnerships with employers to sustain some of these efforts. And I'm also really excited that Raquel is here today to share some of the new ways that the National Early Care and Education Workforce Center is here to support you and your efforts. ACF made an investment in the Workforce Center, not only to provide technical assistance, but we're really excited about the technical assistance that's coming, but also to invest in research and to make a connection between research and practice and bring lived experience forward to really support long-term improvements in recruitment and retention. And so I'm just excited that sort of within this broader efforts around pushing for a long-term sustained investment in early childhood, we also have a lot of support for kind of dealing with the right now. And so I'm going to pass it to Raquel to share some of what's coming up and how you all can be involved in those efforts. And really just excited, Raquel, that you're here. Passing to you now. Thanks.
Thanks, Kim. I can do it at the end if you want as well. You let me know, Joy, when you wanted us to share the great work that we're going to be putting out there.
Let's go ahead. Can we click through?
Oh, this is exciting. So as you know, our Workforce Center is not only focused on research knowledge development, research to practice to see what's out there, but we're also offering technical assistance. So whoever's manning the slide, if they can find the slide with our technical supports, that would be great.
Sorry if I thought it was the next one.
Hey,
there we go.
I feel like the Band-Aid can be pulled earlier. I was nervous about this, so thank you. And I'm glad you're here to support and cheer me on and add to the pieces, Kim. So anyway, next slide, please. So the upcoming work that's coming as far as technical assistance, which is divided into universal, which is open to everyone, and targeted, which is more of our COP work. We have already launched our campaign 1, and I will put the links in the chat in a little bit. And beyond everything, really, if you visit our website, you're going to see our campaign work out there. So we invite you to push it out, look at it, and to see our work that we're launching. We're also launching a foundational TA series. If you want to hear more about that, please go to the link that will be put in the chat for the informational session, which will be next week, August 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My personal, oh, thank you, Sandy. Sandy's the best with that note catcher, by the way. Thank you, Sandy. The links are in your resource list. So the COP applications, we're open now. We had an informational webinar last week, and if you missed it, please make sure you go to our website and catch that. We're currently taking people for team applications or individual applications for our 5 COPs that are being offered. You can read more about it. I don't want to take too much time, but basically they're linked to the 5 policy areas of the Workforce Center, which have to do with compensation and wage scales, strengthening the working conditions, centering the workforce, data, and partnerships and pathways. So if you're interested in that, we are encouraging people to apply as teams, but with the quick turnaround being August 31st, if you want to apply as an individual application, please feel free to do so and learn more about that. And picking up on the great work that Kim and others, many did, the Workforce Wednesdays, we are going to be having our What's Up Workforce webinar on September 13th. Again, the link and more information is found in our website, but the topic is related to some of these previous webinars, which is how do you sustain compensation and investments beyond the American Rescue Plan. Kim, do you have anything else to add, since you have your head in every single 24 tasks that the TA Center and now the whole Workforce Center is doing?
I think I'm just really excited. I put a note in the chat that the preschool development grant Birth to 5 states, you all are prioritized for inclusion in some of the communities of practices. So we really do hope that you will take advantage and apply and build a team to work together in some of these areas.
And share the information, please. That's the biggest partnership we can have to get the word out of all the great resources that are out there. Thank you. Joy, back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Now I'd like to bring in Samantha. Samantha, it's all yours. I'm handing off to you, and Dave, we can go ahead and lower the PowerPoint for right now.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let me get all the notes and everything up correctly and be able to see you. Excellent. So thank you so much. And it's so exciting, all the things that are going on in the world, in the ACF world. I am Sam Eigner-Trewergy. I'm a consultant with ACF, and I'm working specifically on employer-based childcare strategies. And as Kim pointed out, access to high quality, affordable early care and education continues to be a priority for the Biden-Harris administration. The executive order, while it lays out a number of strategies that the administration will pursue to help achieve that goal across the country, it also included an instruction for federal agencies to really consider ways to incentivize employers to begin investing resources or continue and expand investing resources in childcare to support working families. And so with that, sorry, I lost my notes. With that, so it's building on the success of the CHIPS Act. You may remember that the CHIPS Act did have in implementation the incentive for those applying for federal funding to be able to manufacture chips in the United States be required to have a plan of how they will support their employees in accessing childcare services to be able to come to work. So building on that success, the Biden-Harris administration wanted to ensure that federal funding is really going to support good jobs across the board, not just in the new CHIPS funding. And those good jobs have the type of pay and benefits that families can really use to achieve economic mobility and prosperity. In order to do so, business investment in the childcare sector really has to be made in ways that support high quality services for families and children, while also helping to meet the needs of employers who are actually doing the investing. Employer-based childcare can really take on many different shapes and sizes and include a lot of different investment strategies. However, in the most successful models, what you see is the interests of business, of families, both the parents and their children, and the childcare providers themselves are actually all aligned to achieve a common goal that may be a piece of an overall strategy for a state or locality. This requires really careful translation across sectors and a common understanding of how business investment fits into the overall childcare financing puzzle for a state, again, or locality. Many states and communities have begun to develop these partnerships with employees, we'll talk a little bit about today, that have resulted in investment strategies that actually encourage employers to contribute to the cost of care for their employees. And if these are well designed, the strategies can actually help foster affordability for parents by defraying the out-of-pocket cost for care, but they can also support the overarching goals for the childcare sector itself, things like compensation and quality programming, as we were just discussing. Data from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis shows that spending on parents' spending, so parents' out-of-pocket spending on childcare services, has actually stagnated over the past year. This means that revenue, which makes up the bulk of revenue to support the childcare sector, actually has stagnated at a time, has remained constant at a time when additional revenue is desperately needed in the childcare sector to actually increase compensation for the workforce. Employers can help fill this gap if done well and help increase the parent contribution and help bridge the needs of working families to afford childcare, but also the needs of the childcare workforce to have increased compensation and supports to be able to perform their jobs well. While it's important to remember that employer-based childcare is just one investment strategy for the overall financing needed in the early childhood and childcare sector, many of the other federal investments, the non-childcare federal investments and non-Head Start federal investments in the COVID recovery period have actually fostered job growth in other industries. But they need childcare in order to realize that job growth. The federal investments made through the CHIPS bill and the Inflation Recovery Act, for example, will focus on growth in the manufacturing industries and the energy sectors, where employers continue to add jobs, and though labor shortages that those industries are experiencing just continue to highlight the lack of care infrastructure that families need if they're going to go to work and stay and maintain employment. This has been well documented. One of the biggest barriers to workforce participation is access to childcare. Half of all workers and nearly 60% of parents cite a lack of childcare as their reason for leaving the workforce. In 2018 and 19, so pre-COVID, the National Survey of Children's Health reported that parents of 2 million children under the age of 5 had to quit a job, not take a job, or greatly change their job because of problems with childcare. Over half of working parents report difficulties related to childcare, and an inability to find childcare is one of the primary factors that have been documented as keeping women out of the workforce specifically, a demographic many businesses are going after to recruit into their labor force. It's clear the care sector is the backbone of the economy, and people just can't go to work if they don't have care for their loved ones. During this webinar, we really hope to explore the definition of employer-sponsored childcare, the trends and the strategies for investments from business, and then to offer a few specific data sources that can help early childhood stakeholders really help converse with their labor counterparts and labor economists who are really looking for job growth at the state and national level. You'll also hear from states, and we hope you'll contribute by actively letting us know in the chat what you're doing and what questions you have. You'll hear a state that is that's really doing a state-driven employer-sponsored childcare system as a way to try to pull employer investments into their childcare system in more substantial ways. But again, we want this dialogue to be driven by questions from you. So please help us make the best use of our time together and let us know as we dig into the content. So I want to just briefly touch on some data points and around why pursuing employer-sponsored childcare makes sense right now. In general, we all know this data that employees who have access to stable, high-quality care for their children are more reliable, they're more focused, they add to productivity at work and for the bottom line of their business. But that the high costs of care across the country, of childcare across the country, keeps individuals out of the workforce because they're unable to afford this care that would allow them to seek and maintain employment. That is why what's motivating businesses to want to invest in this benefit for employees to help meet their objective of recruiting a workforce. But we know that high quality, stable childcare is both essential for those working parents who they're trying to recruit, as well as the safety and healthy development of the children who are in the care. And quality care relies on nurturing relationships with trusted caregivers. So what we know is despite the high cost of care for families, per child ranges, we know, you all know this, there's a new national database of childcare prices that they can range from 8% to 20% of median family income. And when you look at that, that's actually just masking the low wages for the childcare employees. That childcare employees are more than twice as likely to be living in poverty than any other industry. And that these low wages are actually contributing to the workforce shortages that limit and severely limit the access for parents to be able to obtain affordable care for their children. So you have this vicious cycle and a current system that's really primarily reliant on overburdened families who are trying to make it work and underpaid childcare workers that result in high turnover, lack of adequate childcare supply, and a failed market. We know that that's why government investment is necessary. And we also know that in order to ensure that employees have access to the high quality care that'll help them go and stay at work, we need to invest in the workforce that will deliver the kind of nurturing educational environments that children need. And employer investments in childcare have really, despite the fact that employers want to make investments in their individual employees, that there are some big system barriers that are facing these individual investments that really need to be overcome. That is the systemic undervalue of the workforce and the need to build on the infrastructure. Early childhood leaders who actually know this landscape and know the businesses and the childcare sector can actually really be helpful in informing employers that as they make investments in their employees, they need to take in consideration the overall system that those employees are seeking for care in. And while the employer may be primarily seeking to bolster their own workforce, that needs to be balanced with the perspective of the childcare workforce and the children. For families that are paying for businesses, this can be difficult if you are a small business to take into consideration some of the bigger systemic issues, which is why it's really important for early childhood leaders to really consider where there are opportunities to provide economies of scale, grouping employers together, or allowing them to think more holistically about their workforce beyond their individual employees. So going a little bit deeper into what is employer-sponsored childcare specifically, I want to direct you. There's a resource a link that you got that is the Good Jobs Initiative. The Departments of Commerce and Labor have partnered together to identify what actually comprises a good job. They have 8 principles that are created to a framework that helps align workers, businesses, labor unions, advocates, governments, and federal agencies to create a shared vision of what is job quality. And I say that because while you can access the link to the full overview of the Good Jobs Initiative in your materials, I want to highlight that there are 3 principles that directly address the need for employers to make substantial contributions directly to meet their employees' need for care. So when we talk about, when the Biden-Harris administration talk about good jobs, those include investments from employers to make sure that their employees can access, afford, and support the care that they need. The 3 principles specifically in this Good Jobs Initiative that specifically relate to care. The first are benefits. The Good Jobs Initiative identifies benefits as full-time and part-time workers receiving family-sustaining benefits that promote economic security and mobility. That they should be encouraged to use and empowered to use these benefits that should include health insurance and retirement plans, and also family-related benefits such as support care for needs that may arise from their employment. So if you are, the benefits also include the types of things and supports that families specifically need to access care in order to engage in their employment. This also, the second one is around diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, which states that the employer should remove barriers that can prevent underserved populations from accessing good jobs. And those often include adequate care supports that really can be harder to find in some communities. And when we talk about gaps in affordability and accessibility of childcare, to really meet this objective, an employer would need to be thinking about removing the barriers and investing in the system of care in order for their employees to come to work. Thirdly, that workers are paid a stable and predictable living wage before overtime, tips, and commissions, and take into consideration the regional childcare costs in determining the adequacy of those wages. Making sure, as I said, the national database of childcare prices can help be useful for employers to understand what is adequate pay when you're looking at a family sustaining wage in that locality. So employer-sponsored care can refer to any of these investments that a business is making on behalf of their employees, really in order to ensure that families can access quality care for their children while they are employed. This can take many different forms, and often the type of investment employer makes depends on their location, the type of employee they're seeking to employ, the hours of the work, is it shift work, is it required to be on site, the size of the business, and therefore how many employees they have and where those employees might be located across a municipality or region, and other factors specific to the employer and the type of employee they are recruiting. Employer-sponsored childcare and employer investments in childcare will really be tailored to the specific business model of the employer. This should be taken into account when strategizing around employer-sponsored care in a state or in locality. Because different industries require different employment structures, different hours, different types of training prerequisites, requirements to be on site, different types of overnight requirements, no one benefit structure will work for all employers. Really what you're seeking is a suite of benefits that could be offered across employees. While providing, in addition, because employers often want to recruit employees who will stay with them for a period of time, who are at various stages of life, maybe just had a baby or maybe will may have children across the age span, and they really want to prevent costly turnover, employer-sponsored childcare options usually need to provide flexibility for parents that allow services that grow with children, allow them to provide services for children across age groups, and be flexible as families change and grow over time and the employee remains employed with this employer. While providing childcare supports for employees is critical for recruiting and retaining a workforce across sectors, we also know that the fragile childcare sector needs strategic investment in order to live up to the kinds of services we know it can deliver for family and children, and the family and children really need to thrive. We need businesses to invest in high quality, affordable childcare sector as a whole in order for their employees to have access to any type of care that will allow them to go to work and be successful and achieve economic mobility. So this is where you can't just have an employer, while an employer may be interested in investing in their employees specifically, and that has to be forefront in the strategy. Early childhood really need to help come and understand the landscape in which they are investing and the infrastructure needs that a family will require in order to access any care at all. Again, this can be harder for small employers and really need to think about where you can find economies of scale or where you can group employers together. Oops, sorry. The one way to do that is to consider the entire workforce pipeline. Many jobs require training and certification in order to work, and employers, asking employers to also help think about their needs of their specific workforce pre-employment. What kinds of supports are needed for families who are looking to pursue employment in a new field or an apprenticeship in order to be eligible for a job that could have access to these benefits we just talked about in the Good Jobs Initiative. Ensuring that employers are thinking about the type of care that families need in order to even be eligible for employment. Partnering with education and training programs to provide support services that might include support for dependent and childcare, direct cash assistance, and are critical to building successful workforce development programs. And research has shown over and over again that these kinds of investments at the education and training level can help boost completion rates and job outcomes for participants, particularly women and other underrepresented groups that are a key recruitment target for the workforce right now. The other thing to pay attention to is around apprenticeship and certification programs. Often these programs are earn-as-you-go models. They're very highly successful, where you can earn some wages while getting a certification required for full employment. But without supports, these really may create benefits cliffs where you're actually making a little bit of money to not qualify for maybe subsidies or public assistance anymore, but you don't earn enough to afford childcare or long-term care for family members. Oftentimes, this is something that industry leaders and employers can help pay attention to and help create in their benefit structure. In addition, there may be ancillary employers that might be considered when you're looking at a specific industry. For example, food service or janitorial staff may be subcontracted by an industry that is building physical spaces for growth, like manufacturing. And taking a look at subcontracted service and hospitality needs in a location that's really expected to see job growth can help address the full opportunity for childcare investments, and really help think across employers where there might be opportunities for aggregating type of investment that small employers can't make on their own. So what are some of the different employer-sponsored childcare strategies that we're seeing? In order to really address employer objectives of supporting recruitment and retention, really we are seeing early childhood leaders help target investments in the early childhood sector through a variety of creative engagement tactics. I'm going to go over a couple of the ones that I think trends that we've seen, but again, hope that this is an opportunity for you all to weigh in with some more specifics. We've seen, obviously, one of the key ones is direct investment, where we see fostering either contracts to expand childcare options within an area, or creating systems where an employer can actually directly cost share with an employee to support the contribution, to support the individual employee's costs of care and contribute to that. Another trend that we have been seeing is partnerships with employee representative entities. So using not necessarily an employer going directly to their employees, but working with those that represent groups of employees, either through labor unions is a way we've seen some entities do this, but also things like benefit providers, and using benefit providers and technology resources that benefit providers come to help actually create various strategies of family savings accounts and such for families. We also have seen early childhood leaders and businesses invest in things I'm calling transactional supports, but really helping families get connected to existing resources that may meet their need, having those conversations with individual providers, expanding or enhancing navigation infrastructure like childcare resource and referral entities, things like that. So those are three ways: direct investment, partnering with group of employee representatives, and supporting that transactional support that we're seeing this play out in specific strategies. So what can you do to actually help support employer supported childcare, sponsored childcare from the early childhood perspective? I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just going over some of the data that is available that I know labor economists look at regularly to have you a little bit familiar with them. We'll talk about a few questions to ask yourself and hopefully then open it up for dialogue. So to best target employer-sponsored childcare strategies to support the objectives of the childcare sector in each state, really first you need to understand the needs of employers and what is the state's specific labor market. Becoming familiar with the data that labor economists use regularly in your state economic policy world will make sure that early childhood leaders are savvier partners and really can help navigate employer-sponsored childcare strategies that are meeting the specific needs of the employers that they're bringing to the table. There are a lot of resources that can be used to help think through this, and hopefully many of you are also working with your Department of Labor in your state to think about what they use regularly. But in particular, the Bureau of Labor Statistics put out critical data that's vital for those that are interested in employer-sponsored childcare. So if you aren't familiar with those, the links are in the resources that will be provided. But really take a look at things like the state and metro employment data, which really looks at employment, hours, earnings, really looking at the industry estimates by your either broken down by state or in metro areas and localities, and really get to know who are the employers, what are the hours they're requiring, what industries do they are prevalent in the locality and the state that you are in. Also looking at, you can couple that with wage data to understand for the groups that you're looking at, the industries you're looking at, are the wages sufficient to afford childcare? I've seen many Chamber of Commerce representatives interested in this do the math and use this information coupled with an average childcare price in the region and understand how difficult it is to recruit workers when you're looking at the wage data for that specific region. And then you can couple with that with things around the current population. So who is employed, who is unemployed, what hours are they working, and start to look at the demographics of the labor force and the labor force characteristics to understand who might be most impacted by childcare benefits, who in what industries, and how much would they have to pay in order to actually be able to overcome the affordability challenges that families face. When matching employer-based childcare strategies to the early childhood initiatives underway, you also want to think about making sure that you're matching the ways you're supporting employers to invest in their employees with the overall objectives of the state. As I spend so much time talking about is the challenge of employers wanting to invest in an individual employee's recruitment and retention, but the gaps in the overall infrastructure and system that they need to invest in order to have that employee have access to anything at all. So really thinking about what industries are prevalent in your state and what are projected for growth, and where will that growth occur? What areas, what regions? What are the structure of those jobs that the employers are looking to fill? For example, are they manufacturing shifts? Are they retail? Will there be hospitality? Are they office jobs that require 9 to 5? What does the education workforce look like? And does that need support? Do they need benefits in order to recruit teachers if there's an increase in population expected? Is it construction, which may have very early start times that have unique needs for parents in that field? What hours would parents need to care for children? What types of care do families prefer during those hours? Oftentimes you see families that may use family, friend, and neighbor care for very early or late at night, but still prefer more formalized care in either home-based or center-based during the primary child's waking hours. Does this change as the child grow? What kind of non-standard hour care is available in your state? And where is it unreasonable to ask for providers to meet the needs of 1 or 2 families as a backup? Where are you looking for regular care versus emergency backup care for families? And then what locations are those jobs in, and what is the makeup of the childcare sector in that location? What types of contractual services and other things will they rely on in order to lead, to have that scaling growth? Employee-sponsored childcare must be tailored to the types of employees that an industry or an employer may actually need to rehire or retain. And so while employers may be interested in ensuring access to high quality, affordable care, they still need to ensure that the employees come and stay at work. So understanding the structure of the work in the industries that are most prevalent in your state or community will help early childhood stakeholders dialogue more productively with business interests around some of the broader interests for the childcare investment needed in the infrastructure. So how can PDG leaders really think about doing this effectively? So depending on your state's early childhood structure and who you may be on this call, there may be a variety of different ways of working with the business sector across states and territories. And when you're focused on information, partnership, actively developing formulas for investment, that really, as you all know, states have great resources for you to learn from. So while many employers have come together either within an industry or through a chamber of commerce to make really thinking thoughtful investments in their employee childcare need, different states have found different employer engagement strategies effective, and that often depends on what the governance structure or what some of the where some of the existing engagement with employers exists in a state, whether it be an executive office, in a budget office, or other economically driven offices. With 3 trends that we see with states and how they engage. One is really looking at education and encouragement with employers. So providing information, frameworks for employers to create different kinds of investments, really getting information out there using things like the Best Place for Working Families framework to really help engage and educate employers, and then to bring them to the table. Maine is one state I know that has done a significant amount of work building out an education framework. And so I know that resource is included somewhere in where you have been. Montana, I know, has also done a lot of work with trying to incentivize and encourage employers to make these investments, at really looking at the direct investments and educating them. Another trend is actually creating or expanding a state system to foster this kind of investment, really building out infrastructure that supports some of the back end needs for allowing businesses to make state matched or state sanctioned or state encouraged investments in their employees. There's a number of states that have done a few different ways here. You'll hear some of them and many of them in your in the packet, but I know Michigan was one of the vanguards in this and has a lot of resources to offer. And then the other thing we've seen as states look to create intermediaries to try to help aggregate the business voice by creating either state aligned or state affiliated sort of interest groups that are help develop consensus across business interests. Sometimes these are directly state aligned. Some of these are state affiliated. And like in Massachusetts, there is a business roundtable that has really been an aggregating of business voice. I know Georgia's had an opportunity to make that a little bit more formalized, and other places. I think New Hampshire's done a great job with some of these as well. There's a few other places I know that have done that. But I think one of the questions I'll leave you with is, what questions might you ask yourself about what would make sense for your state? So obviously starting with a strengths-based, what strengths of the early childhood system in your state, and where can that really be an asset for employees that you can sell as employee sponsored childcare efforts? Really thinking about what is it, whether it be a strong home-based provider network, or really thinking about longer hours, things like that. Looking at what type of demand or utilization does childcare really need in order to be sustainable. Having one parent want that childcare in that location is not going to sustain either a business investment or the childcare business itself. So if a single employer really can't account for the kind of demand that you may need to be able to sustain childcare, you may need to think about aggregating across multiple employers and invest in an aggregated strategy to get economies of scale and to get sufficient utilization to make it worth it for the childcare business itself. And then to thinking about what state systems can be leveraged or scaled to try to capture that from employers, to try to funnel the funding to the state sanctioned childcare sector, whether that be licensed or approved, but really those that are meeting a threshold. So really, as you're thinking about partnering with employees and developing employer sponsored childcare investments, really thinking about, how can employers understand the types of childcare that are available to families, and really matching that to the types of employees that business has in the state and locality you're looking at. The starting place is often helping employers think about investing in quality childcare, either using your state definition, or really looking at other ways of allowing, meeting compensation thresholds, and considering around like where the childcare workforce needs to be supported in delivering that quality. So you're ensuring that they're well compensated and they have good working conditions, as you are fostering the kind of investment that could create expansion, or sustaining for employees. You can also help employers think about the cost of quality and the different financing models. So really, what is that threshold of sustainability for utilization that will allow for sufficient and stable care? And what is the threshold they would need to contract directly with existing ECE providers to really help build the supply of quality options? And so when you think about that, is it a single employer? Are you needing to aggregate across employers? And really help think about the range of options and supports that would meet diverse employee needs, including industry specific or community specific needs. Or if you have a large employer, how can they be the driver and bring along some of the smaller employers so that there are a range of options for families, because as children get older, as families change, this will all change the need for families. If you have a family that that the children go on to elementary school, their benefits will need to change, but hopefully their employment won't. And so we hope that that those allow for that flexibility as well. And with that, I hope that that gave you a little bit of frame for conversation.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Take a breath, because we still want to hear a little bit more from you. Questions have not populated in the chat yet, but I want to give people a chance to do that. Yes, drink your water. My first question for you all, and I know we're just a few little questions we can ask. I wanted to know for you, obviously this is a passion for you. This is what you do. This keeps you up at night. In the opposite thing, think of a strength base. What would success look like? Like, what's the dream for you? And let's just think all the way there. What's the North Star for this?
Yeah, I think, there are two big principles for that. The first one is successful. Well, let me say this, start with this. Success looks different for every state and employer. So there's no universal definition, but I think there's two major principles that that we need to hold on to, that any successful model. One is that it's part of an overall financing strategy, right? That an employer in very, very rare cases, can an employer sustain a childcare business alone for their childcare employees. They have to be very large, and the majority of employers in our country are not the very large ones. And so really thinking about the principle that it's not only employer invested and sponsored childcare. It's one of many things that families need and many financing strategies. And Kim started with, it builds on the public infrastructure we know employers need to access for their employees. The second thing I would say is that a successful model, one being part of a suite of financing that childcare might be able to access. The second thing I would say is that the way that the structure is structured is that the way that the employer-sponsored childcare structure for the program is happily meets everyone's needs. It can't just meet the employer's needs and leave the childcare provider unsupported, because that's not sustainable, and we will end up furthering the fragility of the childcare sector. However, if we worry just about the childcare provider and the employer's need and not the family's need, then we're pigeonholing families' needs and giving them inadequate options to really sustain their own trajectory. So really thinking about getting in everyone's perspective and in everyone's objective, and trying to find something that gives employers a success metric around retaining, recruiting and retaining employees, gives families a success metric and a suite of benefit option that allows them to grow their family over time within the same without having to switch employers, and gives the childcare sector the benefit success metric of being able to adequately start to enhance the compensation using this financing and not just maintain status quo.
Thank you, Sam. And I know we have 1 minute. Joy, do we have time for a couple more questions, or did you want to keep moving along?
Why don't we go ahead and ask Caitlin to come in and share Wisconsin's perspective, and then if we've got any questions that come up during her portion of it, we can come back and do another round of Q&A.
Thank you, Sam. You're on break now.
Caitlin, welcome on. Share with us what is going on in Wisconsin, please.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Oh, I look so fuzzy. I'm like all one color. But my name is Caitlin Farrick, and I'm the Grants Initiatives Advisor with the Division of Early Care and Education at Wisconsin Department of Children and Families. And I'm going to talk today about Project Growth, which is an initiative that we launched in early 2022 that is focused on building public-private partnerships and increased collaboration between early learning and care, business, and economic development sectors. And I'm going to share my screen. Just one second. For some reason, my Teams did not close. There we go. I'm going to share my screen. So, one second. So, okay, here's our Project Growth page. So we developed this initiative and it's composed of 2 core programs, Dream Up and Partner Up. I'm going to mostly talk about Partner Up today, but Dream Up is a strategic supply building project that we delivered utilizing preschool development grant funds. And essentially we select communities through a competitive application process, and they develop cross-sector teams with the goal of engaging in conversations and planning around building childcare supply and access within their communities. And we allowed the applicants to define community for them. And so we have rural, urban, tribal nations who have received funding through this program. We partner with First Children's Finance with PDG funds. We fund 28 communities to go through strategic supply building protocol. And at the end of that time, they receive $75,000 stipends to begin to implement activities from that process. And then childcare providers who are regulated within those defined communities are eligible to participate in business training. And then they receive $5,000 stipends at the end of that time. And then we have Partner Up, which is essentially our public-private partnership contracting for slots model. And I'll talk a little bit more about this, but really this is, again, we at DCF pay portion, we utilize PDG, ARPA, and CURSA funding. And we were also fortunate to receive, for our most recent round of applicants, funding from our partners at the Department of Workforce Development. They received federal Quest funding and earmarked some of that for Partner Up. So we were able to do another round of this project. So how did we start doing this and why? I think the challenges, have been stated. We've heard a lot about them, but I just want to highlight this chart. And this is one of the reasons that we launched this program. So I'll explain the survey and how we got this data. This is Wisconsin specific information. And if you look at these little blue bars, you'll see here that of the 900 employees, which we got a really great response to this survey that I'll talk about in a second, only 40% of them offered paid maternity leave. And so then when you think about other sorts of benefits, there was a recognition across our leadership, both within our department and then also within other departments across our enterprise and amongst our non-governmental partners, that there was a lack of support for families with young children just overall, and then particularly around childcare. So we've been hearing from our partners at the Department of Workforce Development and the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation that childcare is being cited by businesses, I think particularly because of COVID, as a huge barrier for them being able to recruit and retain talent. And over half of the businesses that so what we did is we partnered with them. We have a leadership council in early years that includes agency leadership from across the different departments. They came together and really said, DCF, you received all this COVID relief funding and you have PDG funding, really need to come up with some strategies to look at increasing these public-private partnerships so that staff are supported, employers are able to recruit and retain talent. So we spent a number of months designing these 2 programs. In order to get some information also for our design, we worked with a marketing firm to release a survey on employer perceptions of childcare. The link for this final report I sent this, so you should be able to have access to that. But essentially, we received responses from 900 businesses, which we were very pleased with and surprised, because we all know surveying is not always easy. And we learned a lot about employer perceptions related to childcare. I would say that the really high level kind of gist is that most employers have been impacted by lack of availability or lack of access to childcare within their communities. There was something like 75% of them who said that staff have had to, call in, change schedules, miss shifts, and that they were unable to recruit because of childcare as as an access barrier. What was interesting in the survey results was also though that, well, one, you found that the smaller the business, the more aware they were of their employees' challenges. And I will say that for Partner Up, we actually did attract a lot of small businesses to apply for this program. And then the other thing that was interesting is they all, it was overwhelmingly cited as an issue, lack of childcare. But what was also seen is that a lot of businesses didn't necessarily know how or know if this is something that they should directly address themselves. But we did see in here that what they did think would be useful is if there was, resources to help them learn how to partner with childcare, and also grants and other incentives to be able to do so. One of the things that we heard a lot through this process, and is something that we have worked on providing some infrastructure around, is understanding the early learning and care system and how to navigate that from a business perspective. What we hear a lot is that we, as business leaders, think either I sort of do nothing or I need to open like a new childcare program on my campus. And sometimes not necessarily thinking about the options in between, like, providing a smaller stipend to employees, sponsoring a local childcare program, helping them with some upgrades to their programs so they're able to operate, or offering bonuses to their staff. Some of those sorts of, I would say, like more mid-range options. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about Partner Up and really what that is. So Partner Up is our contract for slots program. We, like I mentioned, we have, it's a little just difficult to toggle with the bar up here. Where did my thing go? Did I close out? Sorry, I'm going to keep talking. One of the things that we, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So Partner Up is our contract for slots. We will contribute up to 75% of the total cost of care for an employee, and then their employer contributes a minimum of 25% to sponsor the cost of their childcare. One of the things that we really think about in the design of this and similar philosophy is, yes, one of probably the big overarching driving goal is to increase employer investment or business community investment in childcare and early care and education as a system, and to increase, people's understanding or wanting to contribute, childcare benefits as part of their overall benefits package. The other aspect of this, though, was to also support our childcare workforce and childcare businesses. And so we know, I'm sure many of you do, that what it costs to actually provide care, especially high quality care, is often costs more than what childcare providers are able to charge in tuition, because childcare, as I mentioned earlier, is so unaffordable, and that's true in Wisconsin, and that's true pretty much everywhere. And so we utilize some technical assistance resources from Office of Child Care, a cost calculator, to set our rates. And so we set our rates, they would be above market in most places within Wisconsin, except for some exceptions, perhaps in Madison or Milwaukee. But generally, our rates are much higher than what, especially in our more rural areas, they are charging. And so they are able to, if they be the child care providers, are able to invest the overage amount, if you will, in their child care business, in their quality. And so that is a nice aspect of the program. So we launched this program in early 2022. We had a competitive grant application. We prioritized a few things, one being childcare deserts, using our state definition. A lot of Wisconsin is a childcare desert. We also prioritized businesses that were willing to contribute more than the required 25%, so that we could stretch our funding a little bit further. We also prioritized employers who were sponsoring cost of care for middle or low income employees as well. And then we also incentivized infant toddler care as part of our application criteria, and I can certainly send a copy of our application. And we were really unsure of what the response to this was going to be. We had about $20 million in funding to distribute through contracts. This was our first time doing this, and we received over 660 applications in like a 3-week window from employers around the state wanting to support their childcare costs. Ultimately, in the first 2 rounds, we had enough money to be able to partner with 200 businesses and sponsor almost 1,250 children through the program. And so the response to this was something that we were really excited about. As far as the infrastructure aspects of this and setting this up, we worked with an external vendor. We put out a grant application for someone to actually administer this program for us from a contracting piece. We have a lot of contracts, as you might imagine, with this program, and we did not have the internal capacity to be able to do that. So that is one consideration, is just that if you do a program like this, it is a lot of resourcing to be able to manage all these contracts. Also, when you set rates, the children grow up, they start to get older, and the rates can change. So it is a heavy contract management situation because the amounts change month to month, sometimes as the children get older across the overall spread of contracts. So that is something. But yes, we do work with an outside vendor to be able to do that. And so they are able to do the administrative aspect of this. Again, part of this is also, it is the direct employee sponsorship, and that is something that was spoken about too. We wanted to create a little infrastructure around developing, sort of more increased collaboration between the business and childcare communities and having these conversations around the state. And so we utilized PDG funding to also fund several positions. We call them business childcare advocates that are distributed around the regions of the state. And their role, they're housed at our CCR and ours, or childcare resource and referral agencies. But really what they are charged with doing is to, well, one, provide, we were launching this program in particular, some marketing. And I do think one of the reasons we had really great response is because of the advocates, and then also to provide technical assistance and troubleshooting for our awardees, but then also to help facilitate, broader conversations with businesses, doing outreach to providers, even those who do not participate in our project growth programs, around the importance of partnering. So we also developed a toolkit, which is on our website, that has several modules that really explain how like a business could start to think about partnering with childcare. So it's 6 different modules. It's about including things like, what are different early learning and care programs? Why is quality important? The basics of regulation, benefits for your community, some of those different sorts of pieces. And so we also created that toolkit to address the need that we were hearing, that early learning was very a confusing system to navigate for someone who wasn't part of the field, and for a busy business person or business leader, having a resource that is sort of condensed, able to go through it was something that we worked with Economic Development Corporation and some other early childhood stakeholders to develop. So that was one resource we also developed. But these advocates have been helpful in, a lot of them have sales and marketing backgrounds, and so they are able to help childcare providers, kind of give pitches to businesses and other community organizations to invest in their programs. In some cases, it's been successful. They've had businesses donate funding. We've had businesses who weren't part of Partner Up, but really like the program and are, giving, $5,000 a year stipends to employees towards their childcare costs, things like that. And so this is something where they have really helped bring the business and childcare communities together, develop one-pagers to highlight, how some of these relationships are working, to be able to utilize in conversations with, stakeholders, including legislators who are interested in childcare and economic development within their communities. So that sort of infrastructure piece of these positions has been really great. I would say, as far as things to consider, like I mentioned, this is a heavy contracting process. If you are going to do this the way that we did, which is essentially a matching program. And so we do work with a vendor, but it was essentially a pilot also. So there were just things that we learned along the way. I would say one thing that was challenging at times is we used, like I mentioned, COVID relief and PDG funding, and there are some limitations to that funding. It isn't always the easiest. Some of the federal funding sources aren't the easiest to utilize in combination with one another, because there are requirements around 12-month eligibility and other pieces that can sometimes prove challenging. There are income requirements, that some of which were waived through the COVID relief funding, but there are still parameters and guardrails that you have to follow. And so just tracking to make sure that you're serving people eligible is something that's really key. Another thing that we also prioritize, which I think is important, is small business. And that was a way I think we were able to get a lot of support through this program. We heard from a lot of small business owners that they wanted to, but had a difficult time affording healthcare. And this is a benefit they could afford to provide the people who are working for them. And then, of course, there's always just challenges around being able to have the technology infrastructure and other aspects for data collection. We do collect quite a bit of data on this, but we don't necessarily have a permanent infrastructure right now because this is a temporary program. So I would say that is one of our other challenges, is the fact that a lot of the funding that we are using is temporary. Unfortunately, we did not receive state funding in our most recent budget. So, there is a special session that is happening in a couple weeks, but it is unclear at this point whether we have sustained funding for this program past the fall of 2024, which is when our Quest funding expires. And then I would just share, as far as outcomes, we did do a program evaluation, which I think has been really important and I would encourage. And we have received, I wouldn't say surprisingly, really good feedback from employees. Over 99% of them were, would want to continue participating in the program. It was like 95% of employers wanted to participate in the program. I would just say that, like I mentioned, the administrative aspect of this is challenging. And so it is, you sort of have to be prepared to do continuous quality improvement. And then again, also to the other challenge we noticed is we did increase the required employer contribution for reapplying businesses for our new round, just from 25 to 35% of the total slot. And we did have some businesses drop out because they did not want to pay that extra 10%. And so I will also say that, it still is something where it requires a lot of ongoing conversation and communication and work to continue to work with businesses to help them understand how this is a value add for them. And then, of course, sometimes employers were a little hesitant because not all their employees have children, within caregiving age. And so they were a little hesitant to provide benefits to, just a few of their employees, perhaps, and not all, but we did definitely have some employer champions who talked about how this just improved culture and this was a great program. And so that's helpful. My last point, as I keep speaking and talking, is that we I think we did target the population ultimately that we wanted. So we got, over half of our current workforce have a household income of below 50,000. So we really do see this as a program for people who don't necessarily qualify for subsidy, but certainly have challenges in affording childcare. So I will pause.
Thank you, Caitlin. It's great information from the state perspective because, you know, this sounds great, but what are the challenges? How did you make those connections? How did you move the money? And those are always the big questions.
Yeah,
especially at
we've,
the
you
state
know,
level.
been proud of the program, but I will say like the administrative piece is definitely something that just to prepare yourself for. We also did invest money because we had money at the time in a marketing campaign, which I also think was very helpful, which I know isn't always something states can do, but we had billboards and we had ads. And so I did think that helped kind of draw people to the information. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I'll pause just briefly to see if there are any questions coming in the chat or anybody wants to come off mute and ask a question. And as we pause to do that, Dave, why don't I have you pull the PowerPoint back up to slide 12 or 13?
That's helpful because I forgot to share that slide. So
Perfect.
please look carefully at here you have where you can reach us at that website that I kept saying that the note catcher has as well, where you can find information on the foundational. You can find the actual application for the team application or individual for the COPs and all our upcoming work and our campaign work. And you can directly email us. You can actually tag me in an email if you have a question for me around COPs, or the email will get to wherever it needs to go. So thank you. This worked out great because at the end I was like, I forgot the last slide. So thanks.
It all works out. Thank you for that exchange also in the messages in the chat. And Caitlin says she needs to jump off as well. So if there are any last questions before we move on to the next slide.
Yeah, Albert had a question just about whether this is something, you know, business were just purchasing slots for anyone or for their employees. In this program, we did do it as employee sponsored. So like they're sponsoring their own employees, but I do know there are some businesses that are buying slots for the community, you know, through this project. And that's kind of happening through some of our Dream Up work too. So.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you to Sam and all of our presenters and Raquel. Thanks to everybody who has joined today. Can we go to the next slide, Dave? We have just a few minutes left, and we would like to launch our 5-question evaluation poll. So Dave, can you go ahead and start the poll? Can you take just a couple of minutes, please? There are 5 total questions. So you need to scroll down and answer them all before we finish up the webinar. So we'll go ahead and launch our evaluation poll as we close. And then we will, once the poll is launched, we will move to the last slide with our contact information. As Sandy and everyone mentioned, the information shared in this webinar will come out in our In Case You Missed It at the end of the month. And so you'll be able to get the links if you missed any of them, and also the note catcher again, as well as a recording of the presentation and the information. There was a lot shared today. There's a lot to be able to assimilate, and but I hope some of this information was helpful and that there was new information shared that will be able to at least spur some new thoughts or some next steps for you. So we'll leave the poll open as we close, and I will say, Dave, can you advance the PowerPoint onto the last page? There's our contact information. If there is anything else that you need in between, please do not hesitate to reach out to your PDG B-5 TA specialist or to the TA center with any questions, comments, follow-up. If there are any questions that you have for Raquel about Workforce Center, her information was shared, but if you need us to link you up, we can do that. If you have any questions for Samantha or for Caitlin, we can get those questions answered for you as well. So thank you very much for joining us today, for participating in the poll and answering the questions. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.